Hello, and welcome to another episode of Boundless Body Radio. I'm your host, Casey Ruff, and today we're releasing a special episode. This is part 2 of our anniversary celebration as we are celebrating the 5-year anniversary of Boundless Body Radio. As I was thinking about certain ideas and ways that I would want to celebrate this occasion, 5 years of podcasting, I decided that not only would it be fun to do what we did in part 1, where we released our very first episode. If you got through that, you probably deserve a medal of some kind because it was very cringy, if I do say so myself. I thought it would be really fun for part 2 to go ahead and go through all the different episodes by year and pick out the favorite episodes of our listeners. So this was done primarily by checking out the popularity of certain episodes, mostly on the podcasting side, but also on the YouTube side, to be able to determine which of the episodes we've done so far were liked the most by you, the listener, and were downloaded the most and were watched the most on YouTube. So I have done exactly that. I've gone through each of the years that we've done Boundless Body Radio, year 2020, 2021, 2022, 2023, 2024, and 2025. And I have picked out a clip from that episode that is the most popular episode of that particular year. So I thought it'd be fun, especially if you're a new listener, to go back and listen to some of these full episodes if you are interested in them. We've had so many amazing guests covering so many topics, and we realize that we get new listeners all the time, and you might not be familiar with some of our earlier work to begin with anyway. So anyway, I thought this would be a really fun idea. So we're going to start with the year 2020. We are going to go to episode number 30, which was released on December 14th, 2020. And this episode is called Why We Get Sick with the Incredible Dr. Ben Bikman. Obviously, he has exploded in popularity since we were first able to interview him. He was very gracious to be able to give us his time. Even back then, he was still, quite popular, and he's even more popular now. But we're so grateful that he said yes way before we had very many listeners and gave us a wonderful interview. So we're going to start with that. This is our interview from episode 30 of Boundless Body Radio, Why We Get Sick with the Incredible Dr. Ben Bikman, released on December 14th, 2020. We normally don't start off the show with a listener question, but we're going to start the show with a listener question, which is kind of a question and kind of a statement. Right. I asked somebody close to me if they had a question for you as an insulin researcher, and they said, no, I don't have a question because I don't really, I've heard of insulin. They said, I've always been confused about insulin. I know diabetics take it, but it's like sugar. Yep. So why are they taking it? It just never really made any sense to me. And I said, that is a great listener question and a great place to start. Yeah. I think most people are very confused about it. So can you tell us a little bit about what is the role of insulin?
Yeah, excellent. In fact, that is a great way to start, because I will, someone would look at me or look at even the premise of my book, as you very accurately described it. It's generally a book about insulin resistance, but I didn't put that in the title because I knew the moment someone saw it, they would think, well, that's just relevant to diabetics. So I don't care about that because I'm not a diabetic. They may think that. And that is unfortunate. So insulin is a hormone that is flowing through our blood at all moments, every day, every moment of our lives. Unless we are a type 1 diabetic, only a type 1 diabetic. We cannot lump type 2 diabetes into this. Same definition. A type 1 diabetic is a disease of not making insulin. And so these are people who must replace what they don't have. And so they take insulin injections for the rest of their lives and live perfectly happy, healthy lives. Although the same rules apply to them as anyone else, they want to try to live a life, or in other words, eat a diet that allows them to take as less insulin as possible. And that's certainly one of my central premises, or what people, I hope, would take away from any conversation they hear me in, which is the best way to age well is to keep insulin low. The same thing goes with a type 1 diabetic. It just can't go too low. It needs to be there. Insulin is a hormone required for life. The theme of insulin is to tell cells what to do with energy. That's a general theme, or to tell cells what to do with nutrients, amino acids, glucose, or fats. And that part of that, then, that definition, my defining it that way, encompasses the most commonly consumed view of insulin, which is that it has nothing to do with anything else except glucose. That is unfortunate. It's simply not accurate and doesn't encompass the magnitude, the breadth of what insulin does. But it is true that insulin controls glucose. When someone eats a starchy, sugary meal, that will load the blood with glucose, where glucose will start to spike. That is a dangerous situation. And I do mean it is frankly lethal. If glucose stays too high for too long, the person will start to leak this glucose into the kidneys, and that will pull all of the body water with it from the blood. And the person can die from running out of blood, basically, this hypovolemia. So if we keep the glucose too high for too long after indulging in these bagels or donuts, then we would die. So thankfully, insulin comes in, and it starts pushing that glucose out of the blood into tissues, most especially the muscle. The muscle will consume almost all of that glucose following that meal. It's around 80% of all the glucose will go into the muscle, and insulin is responsible for much of that push of glucose, that movement of glucose. So that's the relevance of insulin with glucose. It is certainly relevant. There's no doubt about it, but it just fails to encompass what insulin does, say, at maintaining neuron structure in the brain, or maintaining joint formation, chondrocyte lifespan at joints, or maintaining the protein in muscles. Once muscles have made protein, insulin helps defend that muscle protein from getting broken down. So none of those have anything to do with glucose, but they have more to do with insulin simply telling cells, take in nutrients and store them. Whether it stores them as energetic molecules like glycogen or triglycerides, or whether it's telling the cell to store nutrients as future hormones, to make hormones from other molecules, or to make structural molecules. In other words, telling a cell to take in amino acids and make structural support proteins, or to make structural or support lipids, fats, to help provide structure to the cell or the mitochondria and other organelles within the cell. But again, my long-winded answer to the question is insulin is relevant to every cell, and it tells every cell what to do with energy. And I do mean every cell, literally every cell in the body. And I don't mean that, I'm not using that term as the kids do it these days. I do mean literally every cell in the body has insulin receptors, which means insulin has an effect on every single cell in the body. So it's an important hormone.
Interesting.
And when someone is getting into insulin resistance, now that we've defined the hormone, insulin resistance, as it occurs, as we discuss it in a human body, insulin resistance is actually two things. The first is that some cells aren't responding to insulin as well as they were before. For example, the muscle cells, they aren't responding to insulin as well as they were before. And now the muscle cells aren't taking in as much glucose. And so glucose is getting stuck in the blood. And so glucose levels would start to climb over the years. But at the same time, the other half of the coin, known as insulin resistance, is that blood insulin levels are elevated, a condition that we call hyperinsulinemia. So in order to understand the relevance of insulin resistance in chronic diseases, such as Alzheimer's, breast or prostate cancer, or erectile dysfunction, or PCOS, whatever it is, to understand insulin resistance role in those disorders, you must understand that it is those two things, the confluence of compromised insulin action at certain cells and hyperinsulinemia. Those two are the pillars of insulin resistance.
Interesting. So that's a perfect segue. I have a little list here that I put together, and I do mean this is a little list. I could have gone on and on and on and on, but I'm just going to read these things, and I want to know what is happening in your brain as you hear these things. Type 2 diabetes, obesity, hypertension, PCOS, erectile dysfunction, acid reflux, osteoarthritis, dementia. That's a small list of a lot of different conditions and diseases. What goes through your brain when I read those to you?
Yeah. Frankly, it is admittedly the premise of the book. And that is that each of those, as distinct as they may be, they do have at least some common core, which is insulin resistance. To varying degrees, insulin will play either a causal or exacerbating role in those diseases. So insulin resistance is either outright causing the problem, like it is with type 2 diabetes or polycystic ovarian syndrome or erectile dysfunction, or it's contributing to it, like say it is for certain cancers or dementia, Alzheimer's disease. So and that to me, so I would want anyone to know who's listening, they may think, boy, Bickman, you're really going off the rails here. That's a little too bold. It would be bold if it weren't for the evidence that supports that conclusion. So I'd want anyone to know that I am wholly justified in saying that, as bold as it may be, simply because there is significant evidence to support it. And the reason it should be, to me, wonderful news. It's the good news. It's the gospel of human health. Because if you can acknowledge that many of these seemingly distinct problems do at least have one common thread or underlying it, one common core, a common root, then you address the root. If you're worried about the branches of a sick tree, don't prune the individual branches, just cut down the damn tree. And so we have with insulin resistance, if you could imagine a guy who's opening up his medicine cabinet, he's taking one medication for his type 2 diabetes. He's taking a medication for his hypertension, a medication for his erectile dysfunction. How liberating would it be for him to realize, wait, all of these are actually related and to varying degrees derivative of insulin resistance? Well, then he asks himself the question, how do I then just address my insulin resistance? And then the answer to that question is change your diet. Not that I don't want to get ahead of ourselves in the conversation, but back to my point, if we can acknowledge that insulin resistance is relevant to virtually every chronic disease, it gives us a way and is causal, then we can address the actual root problem rather than just taking medications that are going to address symptoms of the insulin resistance.
Interesting. So that was something that really surprised me when I was first getting into this. Like, I've worked with type 2 diabetics, and we have definitely gotten them off of insulin, which is great. But then to see, your blood pressure also went down, your mental clarity is way up. There's other things that clear themselves up when you address, you're right, like that root cause, not the branches, the trunk.
Yep.
Yeah, that's so awesome.
That's right. Yeah, that in fact, I'm thrilled when I see like what you're doing, when you're putting into practice something that I as a scientist have concluded is relevant. That is gratifying. Indeed, it's one of my hopes as a scientist. There's nothing more frustrating than thinking you have the answer to relevant questions, but not having a way to share that answer with other people. In fact, that was when, about 3 or 4 years ago, when I got involved in social media, it was in no way to be self-aggrandizing. That's why I don't post pictures of myself doing workouts or even pictures of myself eating. I didn't ever want it to be about me. And because I hate that kind of attention, I wanted simply to have a platform for sharing answers to questions that I knew people had that I couldn't as a scientist. And so again, my point, where you have a practitioner, someone who's on the front lines or where the rubber meets the road, like what you're doing, where you can take some of the insight that a scientist has found and put it into practice, that is wonderful, because I don't do that. I am simply the guy who's putting some fuel in the engine, but there still has to be that point of, well, the vehicle's not going to move if the wheels aren't on the ground. We need that, and you're playing that part, and I'm glad for that.
Well, we're grateful to be getting the information from people like you who are just looking for answers. I mean, we don't care what people eat. I'm not paid whether you eat a steak or whether you eat cereal. I don't care.
Yeah.
But I do care if you lose fat the way you want to, or reverse some of these chronic conditions. So we just have to find, what works best. As far as insulin resistance goes, here's an analogy I like to use, and you can tell me if this works or not. Let's say I drink a beer and I get a buzz. And then a month later, I don't get a buzz anymore. So now I need to drink 2 or 3 beers. And then a month later, I need to drink more and more and more. And one day I come to you, Ben, and I say, dude, I am drinking like 12 beers a night. I'm not getting a buzz anymore. What should I do? And you say, oh, well, here's a bottle of Jack Daniels. You should drink this and you'll get a buzz.
Yep.
Is that a fair analogy, especially related to type 2 diabetes?
That's a perfect analogy. Yeah. So it's insulin. One of the key causes of insulin resistance is chronically elevated insulin, and you're describing it in a perfect analogy. And the fundamental truth underlying both of these instances, whether it's chronic alcohol exposure leading to alcoholism, or whether it's chronic insulin exposure leading to insulin resistance, the theme of it is when cells are exposed to an incessant stimulus, they will start to reduce their sensitivity to that stimulus. So in other words, if there's too much of something, then the body will start to reduce its sensitivity to that something. And we see this in all ways in life, whether it's, someone's been listening to music too loud and they become deaf. Now, all of a sudden, ironically, they can't hear the music as well. If they've been exposing themselves to some illicit substances like, say, alcohol or caffeine or other, harder drugs, they need more and more of that substance to get the response that they're seeking. The same thing goes with hormones, and insulin is a prime example. Chronically elevated insulin will be contributing to insulin resistance. Now, I'm not going to be so bold to say it's the only factor. Indeed, I don't. I believe there are other relevant factors, but I feel strongly that insulin is a primary part of what's driving insulin resistance. Namely, someone is eating a diet that is, well, basically it's high in refined starches and sugars, and they're eating every 2 hours because they've been told to eat 6 meals a day. And that is a wonderful way to keep insulin elevated literally every waking moment of the day and even well into the night. That will drive insulin resistance.
Our next episode is coming from 2021, was episode number 50 of Boundless Body Radio, and this was titled The Big Fat Surprise with New York Times bestselling author Nina Teicholz. This was such an honor to be able to do this interview. Nina has absolutely changed my life. Her book, The Big Fat Surprise, is absolutely wonderful. I actually genuinely was not expecting this, but I got really choked up in the introduction when we brought her on. My wife was able to do the interview with me as well, so that was quite special. And yeah, when I look back on all the amazing episodes we've done, this one really stands out as one of my absolute favorites. Her work is still incredible. Be sure to look her up and make sure you're following her. We've hosted her several times on the show at this point. I've gotten to meet her and personally thank her for her work. But yeah, like I said, it was a little surprise that I got so emotional when I was introducing her. So again, this clip taken from episode number 50, The Big Fat Surprise with New York Times bestselling author Nina Teicholz, which was released on January 31st, 2021. Your book is about Oreos and aldehydes and science and pseudoscience and all kinds of crazy things. It's not a nutrition book. This is like a thriller. It's like a murder mystery. You don't even have to be interested in nutrition to like find this book absolutely gripping. What a crazy story.
Well, thank you for that. The Economist called it a nutrition thriller, which seems kind of like that's an oxymoron. How can nutrition be thrilling? But in fact, it's because the politics of nutrition to me, are so overwhelmingly stunning. Like it's really not about science. I mean, it is about science but it's also about all the science that has been suppressed and how that science was suppressed and by whom and all the tactics that they used and sort of the battles that went on between scientists and still go on today. So it's totally fascinating that this world that we think is such a sober, rigorous place where we're unfolding our knowledge the way that we learn in science class when we're young, is actually nothing like that. It's actually people trying to beat each other up and not publish findings that are that go against sort of the medical nutritional dogma. I mean, it really is. I still can't believe. It's why I didn't give up, in all the nearly a decade that I spent researching this book, because there were so many surprises. Every time you looked at a paper, it was like its own little mystery book, which is this paper going to report its actual findings? How are the authors going to deny their findings because they can't risk losing more funding? I mean, there's just so many mysteries in all these papers. And so it is endlessly interesting.
So crazy. I've heard you on many, many, many different platforms, but I don't know that I've ever heard you tell the story of what it was like to write that book. What were those 10 years like? I mean, you just said it was, one study would be this rabbit hole. Like, what was your day to day writing this book?
Well, it's hard to categorize a full, let's say it was 9 years that I spent, and I wasted a lot of time going down rabbit holes. For instance, there's an entire unpublished chapter that I could still publish that is on omega-6s and omega-3s. That in the end, my editor thought, well, this is kind of off topic and I don't think this really goes in the book. But that probably took like an entire year of my life. And then I wrote maybe another chapter just on margarine that we decided was also should not go into the book, but it was completely fascinating about all the margarine wars that took place in this country and the housewives that took to the street in protest, demanding that they have access to be able to buy margarine in the 30s and 40s, wow. 1930s and 40s. So wow. There were, I also, my original publisher dropped me. And so there was a while that I had no publisher. And then the original editor was fired from that publisher. And then she went on to another publishing house, Simon & Schuster, and purchased my book there. And then she was fired from Simon & Schuster. So another editor took it over. Wow. I mean, I think a lot of writers have stories like this of books that are, nearly orphaned or don't make it to see the light, or people think it's, you're late and you're overdue and you haven't missed your deadline. And so I think many times this book barely saw the light. But I'll just tell you one other little story about writing the book, which I think is just relevant for everybody who experiences learning this body of knowledge that is that really turns their world upside down. So when you come across this body of knowledge that seems to disprove everything you've ever believed in your life about food, like what food is good to eat and what food is unhealthy, you don't believe yourself. You think it's not possible to believe this. It seems so far from it seems to be such a sorry to stumble, but it just is it's such a revolutionary set of ideas. And so I would routinely lie down on the floor in our living room and say to my husband, I can't be right. I must be wrong. This must be wrong. I need to, what did I miss? How can I disprove myself? Which I realize is a somewhat flattering thing to say about myself, that I'm trying to disprove myself, which is what really all scientists should do. But I was so nervous about coming out with a body of work like this that was so aggressive in a way. And there are many things that I, in retrospect would have done differently in order to have a different kind of reception. But all I can say, it was a completely honest piece of work. I didn't, I wasn't reading anything else at the time. I wasn't paying attention to the politics. I really was just trying to get to the bottom of a set of problems.
Wow. Well, there's a quote from Tom Clancy, I believe, where he says the only difference between fiction and nonfiction is that fiction has to make sense. So between what you found writing the book and the actual process of writing the book, sounds like it's so bizarre that's the only way this story is true. It's crazy.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, to understand the story that you uncovered, we need to kind of unpack how you found it. So can you tell us what it was like, in New York City, when you started to unravel this kind of mystery, 20 years ago?
Well, my introduction to this whole world, I think, which I've recounted in other to other audiences, is just that I had been assigned a story on trans fats by my editor at Gourmet Magazine, for whom I was doing a series of basically investigative food stories. And at the time, I knew nothing about trans fats. I didn't know what they were. It was the early 2000s. Nobody, it was not something that people commonly knew about. And I started researching trans fats, and I discovered this whole world of people who literally told me stories that made me feel like I was investigating the mob, like people who would hang up on me if I asked them about dietary fat. And even if I asked the question, is it possible that we got it wrong on fat, and that maybe the low-fat diet has not been so healthy? And a professor at a university would hang up on me. Or they would say, if you're going to take that line, I refuse to talk to you. Or I would hear stories from one of the early researchers on trans fats. Her name is Mary Enoch. She's now passed, but she told me stories about how executives from the margarine industry had visited her to try to shut down her research. Or how her paper, these executives had called the editor of an academic journal to try to yank her papers on trans fats. She was one of the first people to sound the alarm about trans fats. So I thought that this was a very different world than I had imagined. But really that whole story was about trans fats, and I was going to write a book on trans fats. That was my book contract, my original book contract. And then the more that I dug into it I spoke to Gary Taubes, and I read some really amazing journalism that had been done by a writer for The Atlantic in like 1989 on these issues. And I realized there was just such a bigger, deeper, wider story about all fats that we'd seemed to have gotten it wrong, not only about trans fats, which we had overlooked as a health danger, but our whole idea about good fat, bad fat, how much fat is healthy to eat, like all of that was wrong. And that just sent me down the rabbit hole. And then I really just spent years and years trying to untangle that. It wasn't until my final editor came to me and said, after she read the manuscript, she said, Nina, I really think your book is about saturated fats. So that was how I learned that I had written a book on saturated fats, and that's what came out. But It really was not pre-planned in any way. It was just something that happened to me, really.
Wow.
More than I made it happen.
Were you ever like personally nervous that somebody would find you or like threaten you or anything like that?
I do still sometimes worry about that, because I think that, I am still routinely attacked by people. There are people who spread lies and rumors about me. Just this week, in an article in Men's Health, David Katz, who's been one of my most consistent critics, who used to be at Yale, is no longer, runs a diet company, and has been the head of a vegan advocacy group for years. He has been accusing me. He's been saying that I'm a lobbyist for the beef industry and that I don't know anything about nutrition. And he's been doing this for years. And I do sometimes fear that kind of hatred and those attacks will translate into something, something in the physical realm. But, you can't live in fear. So you just have to, we all just have to keep soldering on. I think that the other way that this kind of, if you want to call it, there's sort of a movement or a group of people who are promoting alternative ideas about nutrition. I think that, we have seen other areas where it's not physical, but people's videos are being yanked from YouTube. People are being shadow banned on various forms of social media. People are being pulled off Wikipedia. There's various ways that I think that we see that there's some kind of effort to try to suppress these ideas that are coming out.
In your opinion, the people the highly educated people, I should say, that are suppressing all of that information, are they brainwashed, or are they being paid? It's nothing short of genocide, it seems like, if we're purposely giving misinformation that's keeping people sick and dying.
Well, that's a very interesting question. What are the forces that are trying to keep these ideas down? In my view, we're not, I think there's, nobody is saying that, that I'm, or what I suggest is right for everybody. But I think there's a general belief, and that I support in science, that differing views should at least be given air and light and be debated, right? So, but there's clearly an attempt to try to shut down ideas. And what are the sources of those forces? Well, it's really beyond the reach of my vision. Some of it I can see. I can see that there is a tremendous amount of investment in the current diet that is recommended by the government and by the American Heart Association. It's not only that they have their institutions invested in this diet, which is high grain and still pretty much low fat, and lots of vegetable oils and caps on saturated fat, none of which I think is healthy or is actually following the science. But these large institutions, they cannot be flip-flopping on their publics, right? And they cannot be seen to be wrong, because everything depends on the public trust in these institutions. So, they are kind of immutable to change. It's like trying to move the Titanic. And they are at the same time also very much in bed with large multinational food corporations and pharmaceutical companies. So, and those interests are not only partner with the USDA, which issues our guidelines, but they also partner with the American Heart Association. And they're also involved in sponsoring all kinds of supposed nonprofits and groups that are promoting now I think mainly they're promoting a largely what they call a plant-based diet. We might recognize that as a vegetarian or vegan diet. And that is a very high carbohydrate diet that, whatever you think of it, is really not, because of its high carbohydrate content and its reliance on vegetable oils or seed oils, more accurately, is really not a particularly healthy diet or a healthy diet at all for the majority of people on this planet.
This brings us to 2022, and we are going to go to episode 362, titled Visceral Fat, Carnivore Diets, and Sprinting with Dr. Sean O'Mara. This episode was released on October 31st, 2022. I thought this clip was really very interesting as he talks about aging in this episode, and we had tons and tons of downloads, lots of feedback, lots of responses from this episode. So this was by far the most popular episode of 2022, again, called Visceral Fat, Carnivore Diets, and Sprinting with Dr. Sean O'Mara. It was episode 362 of Boundless Body Radio, released on Halloween, October 31st, 2022.
But the compromise to the curriculum in medical school is just so great, influenced by big pharma and even health insurance industry that make a huge amount of money. The bottom line is the largest part of our economy, Casey, is healthcare. It's bigger than Amazon. It's bigger than IT. It's bigger than oil. It's bigger than energy. Literally healthcare. And over 90% of that is treating chronic disease, which is entirely preventable. So literally the world's largest problem is what people are making money off of perpetuating. It's completely preventable. And I say it's the world's and humanity's largest problem because nothing else, if you're listening today, nothing else decreases human productivity more than chronic disease. Nothing reduces the quality of life more than chronic disease. Nothing reduces the productivity of commerce more than chronic disease and employees. Nothing costs us more than chronic disease. And nothing kills more human beings globally than chronic disease. And if you're listening today and you've heard that for the first time, ask yourself, why in the heck have I never heard that? And why isn't that being discussed?
That is bananas. I've been in this world for long enough to know that that's the case, but I love how you concluded that by saying if you've never heard that message before, it's going to blow your mind. The medical system is designed to keep you sick and alive. I want to make you diabetic at age 20 and keep you alive until age 90 so I can feed you pills and procedures that whole time. Is that correct?
No, that's exactly it. And if you're listening today and that seems kind of crazy, well, let me ask you what your experience is, listener. Think about all the people that are older than you in your life. Or if you're already older, think about yourself and your colleagues or whatever, family members. And here's what happened as they start going to doctors, their bag of pills start growing, more and more medications. And oh, by the way, they start performing less. They start aching more. And they start accumulating more chronic disease. Well, let me ask you, why in the world do we consumers tolerate a segment of service to consumers that just is horrible? You just go and you get worse. I mean, we would keep taking our car to the automobile, garage maintenance service if they just kept destroying the car, making it worse and making more money. No. Or the same thing with any other consumer-based service or product. If it was just every time you went, you slowly got worse and worse, we wouldn't put up with it. But the medical industry has foisted upon us, and I think they're exploiting in part the preference, I call it like almost a lazy gene, of people wanting shortcuts. And they'll take a shortcut rather than walking a long way that's better, to take a pill, because they're blinded to all those side effects and problems and the accumulation of chronic disease. But your goal should be, every year of my life, I get better. So I will posit to you and your audience that literally, as you get older and more gray hair, you become better performing. You become better living. And I know it's a radical concept, but people tend to believe that they're at their best in their 20s. Wrong answer. For 4 million years, the highest performers were gray-haired men and women, because they did not have chronic disease and they had accumulated knowledge and skill sets to perform exceptionally well. We see a tiny glimmer of this in high performers like Tom Brady. Now, he may not have the gray hair that I have, but he has dedicated himself to becoming more healthy. You know, you could argue some of the things with some of the things he does and doesn't do, but he is high performing and he's older. So if you're listening today, the future, I believe, is an awareness of the biomarkers and biometrics that are available to us that we can follow to eradicate chronic disease, and the accumulated knowledge of life experience, how to live better, so that we perform better, live better, and that should be what is attractive to people. But today, we value youth. The youth don't know because they're too young. And if you're a 40, 50-year-old soccer mom that's overweight, you're going to some 20-something personal trainer or health coach, you're not going to get better because their ideas about being better are based on a 20-year-old's experience. You got to follow very, very fit, very, very high-performing older people with gray hair whose appearance and performance validate that they know how to live well. So I define health based on 2 metrics. Health equals mathematically an expression of how you appear and how you perform. And that is the base of the level of health that you have. Your capacity for imparting that knowledge is really predicated on experience. So as you get older, you'll become more effective. So the most effective influencers of the future will be gray-haired, very attractive, very high-performing older men and women, as it was for 4 million years until processed foods came along, when we started planting grains and consuming them. And so now older people look terrible. And why do the young people not follow the older people? Because they look terrible and they perform terrible. When I was younger, you know, a young man, like say 5, 6, 7 years of age, older people weren't so riddled with chronic disease, not as bad as they are today. Obesity skyrocketing, but they were still bad, and we respected the elderly, you know, more than we do today. Today, nobody visits the elderly. They sit in, you know, nursing homes, senior care centers. The door opens, every face turns to the door to see if it's somebody coming to visit them. Very, very sad situations. And the older people can't impart knowledge the way they used to because their face and their body says, pay no attention to me. I don't know how to live well. I haven't lived well. But you want to be a better influencer. And if you're, you know, on Instagram, you're in social media, and you want to be an ultimate influencer for longer, then you better maintain your health by having a better appearance. And I'm not talking makeup, because that's only going to work for so long. You also need to have high performance, and all the makeup in the world and clothing is not going to help you perform better. So you have to figure out how you live, lifestyle choices. And that's why I really like social media in your space and what people are doing to help bring attention and awareness that it's all about lifestyle choices to influence how healthy you are.
Wow. So I just read an article about Instagram face. So people using different filters or getting different plastic surgery to basically combine all the best features of like a bunch of different races to make this like perfect like Instagram face. And it's like, that's so ridiculous. When I look at you, I look at Sean Baker, I look at Brad Kearns, I look at Dr. Wiedemann. These people are like 50s, 60s. You know, Mark Sisson, he's paddling his paddleboard in the ocean around France and enjoying life. Dr. Wiedemann is doing cartwheels on the beach. Like, these people are not just like, you know, slowly being more decrepit over time. They're thriving. They're in their best years. And I think for myself, I'm 38. I feel the best that I've ever felt now. I look forward to aging. I would not go back to my 20s or early 30s at all. You guys are amazing examples. And if you look at people who live and eat in this certain way, that's what happens. They reverse age, it seems. If you, especially when you compare it to the delta of everybody else who is just like completely going down the tank. It's terrible.
Yeah, no, really, really, really good points. In fact, you know, on that, if you asked all those individuals that you just mentioned, how long do you want to live? They're going to say 130, 150. If they could, you know, live that long, they'd want to say that. But if you ask the average 50-year-old and 60-year-old, how long do you want to live? Or you tell them, I can work with you and get you to live to be 130. And I've done this every day, all day long for years, in a kind of a practice, a primary care practice where patients would come in. I would routinely say that to them. This is how they'd respond. Oh, no, I don't want to live that long. The reason is the misery factor, okay? As chronic disease besets your life, you become miserable and you're not happy. Your quality of life has reduced your outlook and hope for the future. The message I like to impart is to the vast majority of people listening right now, if you live properly, make the life better lifestyle, informed choices, your best years are literally ahead of you. And once you get people to understand that, start living that way, they improve their quality of life. Then they don't shudder at the notion of living to be 130 or 150 years of age. I don't know how long will people live. And the most important thing to me is not so much longevity, but quality of life. And that's starting to get more attention. But quality of life really is predicated upon the amount of disease that one person or a person tolerates. The system is potentiated, set up to encourage disease because it's highly profitable. It's the largest part of our economy, as we said earlier. So there's need for a rebellion. One of the things that I think has to happen, honestly, Casey, is with regard to those people you set out, is we have role models. I've watched, I've done lots of interesting things throughout my life. I have observed that we can find role models for anything. The best football players, the best violinists, the best gymnasts, the best artists, the best musicians, the best actors. People could routinely knock these things out. If you go up to, average people, they'll be able to tell you who the best at anything, attorneys or whatever. But when it comes to, if you walked up to the average person on the street, tell me who the healthiest man or the healthiest woman in the world is. Tell me who somebody's really healthy. They'd be like, oh, well. So how are we ever going to begin influencing young people to be excited about the critically important objective of living a healthy life without having these role models? So I stand for the notion that it's an important objective that we identify what health is, we promote it, and one idea I floated around out there, and I'll just run it by the audience, is the world's healthiest man contest. Ought to be done. We ought to identify who the healthiest man, who the healthiest woman in the world is, find out the metrics, and create a competition. That's going to bring the alphas out. Everybody's going to want to do that. And you can also do a thing for everything. Who's the healthiest attorney? Who's the healthiest, violinist? Who's the healthiest football player? Create all sorts of, competition and buzz. But the important objective there is we need to promote awareness of health and create a deep attraction and a longing within the younger population and within contemporaries. So people, my age, 59, look at other, like the healthiest men and women and say, I want to be like that person. And oh, by the way, it's easily achieved, all free. None of this, everything I do is not something you got to go to a doctor and have surgery or buy medicine. It's lifestyle choices. It's all how you live your life is the greatest influence on how well you're going to live your life and how much you're going to enjoy it.
Topping out year 2023 is an episode we did with Raymond Nazon, who is a carnivore coach. And this episode is called Priming, Feasting, and Fasting with carnivore Raymond Nazon. This was episode 468 of Boundless Body Radio, which was released on June 5th, 2025. Boy, this concept really, really, really resonated with our listeners. Our most popular episodes definitely come from the nutrition space, in particular as it pertains to low carbohydrate, ketogenic, or carnivore diets. And this one got a huge response, both on YouTube and on the podcast channel. We've hosted Raymond twice. We actually hosted him recently on episode 844. That one wasn't as popular, so not one of your favorites, at least so far at this point, but one that I really loved and definitely think you should go check out. But again, this episode for 2023 is titled Priming, Feasting, and Fasting with carnivore Raymond Nazon. It was episode 468, released on June 5th, 2023. Maybe this is a good time to bring up your talk that you had in Austin. This is starting to drift into that as far as the conversation. Priming, feasting, and fasting. Tell us how you came up with those terms and what you mean by each of those.
Yeah. So feasting and fasting means, you're pretty much eating as much as comfortably stuffed as you can so that you can have comfortable fasting. But the priming piece was very important because without the priming piece, you can't set yourself up for proper feasting and fasting from there. I use the analogy of filling up a car, a gas tank. You fill it up all the way full, and then when it's full, it's fully primed, right? When it's fully primed, it takes a while for it to go down. So that means you can actually take a good hit. So you can have a lot of stress, and then you're still not craving. You can have a lot of chances of under eating by accident or whatever, and it still won't affect you because you're properly primed. The idea is to make sure you're always at that full tank and knowing when you start reducing. So priming became important. Priming, I wanted to keep it simple. I wanted to keep it simple for people to get it. And priming, all it is eating 3 meals a day plus for the first week. So in our snacks is included, and actually having coffee or tea, if you have coffee or tea, for dessert. That part, nobody really understood, right? The other 3 meals, they wrap their heads on pretty easy. That coffee or tea for dessert, people go kind of crazy on that. They're like, I can't do this. And I'm like, you know why you can fast until 1 o'clock all the time and think that it's a hunky-dory? Because you're suppressing your appetite. Why would you want to do that? If you're trying to listen to your body properly, get the coffee as a dessert. I'm not telling you to get rid of the coffee or tea or anything like that. Just do it after your meal. So that changed the whole ballgame.
Okay, awesome. So is priming just something that you do when you're first starting on a carnivore diet?
Yes. So that I like that. As a matter of fact, I even like priming for some experienced carnivores that feel like they might have tendency to undereat because they're just used to being hungry all the time. And I've had experienced carnivore that's telling me that, they never went a day where they don't feel hungry all the time. And I'm like, yeah, you need to prime.
Okay.
Yes, it might be miserable, but you got to get that gas tank filled up.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, so it's a cool tool that can be used really anywhere in somebody's journey, but especially when somebody is getting started or they're just chronically under eating. So that would be the first week, 2 weeks. What's kind of the average time that somebody's going to live there?
Priming it's a 3-week process, actually. So the second week is actually where you're just eating 3 meals with no snacks. You're getting prepped up for less eating. And then the third week is actually 2 meals and with no snacks. And it should be actually where your body's begging to go to those 2 meals. the idea behind it is getting you ready for the fast from there. And the way you test your priming is you go into a 23-1 water only fast. And that's how you test it, how well you've done. If you're not able to do any of those, whether it's 2 MADs for 7 days without snacks, then obviously you're not ready. So that's how you find out whether you're primed.
Okay. So you almost like test out of it. And that way, you got a 3-week average where most people can do that cadence and get it on in 3 weeks. But if other people are lagging behind, maybe they need a few more weeks of getting used to 2 meals a day, that test out would be a way that they would know they need to live there a little bit longer.
Exactly. And also for experienced carnivores, I noticed for them about a week is good enough for them, or to a week and a half. So, it does depend. And I don't want people to override by any means their true. So in other words, I don't want them to overstuff themselves where they're sick either. So the idea is you're not overdoing priming. You don't want to overdo priming. You don't want to do it too often. It's not a good idea. You want that gas tank to go down, so it's a balance, but it's an art too. To me, the beauty is when you start doing this, and I see this aha light bulb moment whenever people prime, they're like, I get it now. I get it, what it means to be fully nourished. And that's the concept that I want them to feel, what full nourishment feels like and what fasting on a full nourishment cycle feels like.
I love that. That's amazing. Okay. So as we're going through the program, we're getting better at priming. We're kind of getting past that. Tell us about the feasting. What kind of patterns do you want people to get into when they do choose to eat?
Yeah. So when they choose to eat, first of all, one of the biggest tricks I have, if you're fasting, especially on my program, because we go as high as 72, I want you to be able to eat that same portion meal that you eat normally without any repercussions. That's also another key sign you're ready for that fast. If you're starting to have problems like brain fogs, fatigue, cravings after a fast, any of those, you're not ready for that fast. Your body is just not ready to get there. So why would you want to push it extra hard? Don't get me wrong. There are special circumstances. For example, if you have Dr. Jason Fung will put people on 14-day fast right away. I get that. That's more medical. I'm not dealing with that. I'm dealing with people who can do constant fasting all the time.
Okay.
And get the benefit of that.
Yeah, gotcha. So we kind of need to reverse our thinking then. Rather than trying to force people into fasting, we need to prime people, overfeed them, get them into a pattern where they are sufficiently taking in calories and nutrients when they do eat, to then allow the fasting to come in and be something that's a lot more organic and not forced. Do I have that correct?
Exactly. So what we know from the mice studies, for example, Walter Longo made the mice study. He actually lowered the caloric restrictions on some mice, and then the other ones, he actually got them to fast. And on the lower restrictions, their bodies looked better, they were leaner, but they didn't have any lifespan. On the ones that actually was forced to fast, but no calorie restriction allowed. So there were days that they would fast, and then they would fully eat whatever they want. They had longer lifespan, and their weight was in check, and their furs, everything looked good. So what we need to know is it's about the balance between your feast and the fast. It's not calorie restriction. It's not less calories. All calorie restriction is going to do for you is malnourish you. We go into a malnourished state. People think that they come in fat. They're like, I'm obviously fully nourished. No, it doesn't work that way. You're actually chronically malnourished. And that's why I tell them, I know that doesn't make sense, but when you come to me 400 or 500 pounds, you're chronically malnourished.
Yeah. You would think that would be such a paradox. And it's definitely not one that you see in nature. And this does follow a very natural pattern. If you look at the patterns of other animals and how they hunt, if you think about the tiger, when the tiger gets hungry, it's time to hunt. It's not even necessarily time to eat. It's time to hunt. This is why fasted workouts work really well. You should do a lot of your workouts in the fasted state. You'll have better energy and mental clarity. You'll be able to lift more. I think you'll be able to perform sports a lot better. I notice my hockey games and cycling is way better when I'm in the fasted state. So there's the tiger. It goes on the hunt. When it kills something, it feasts. It takes as many of the most nutrient-dense calories it can find. It got first choice of all of that stuff. So it go in and eat whatever it can until it's so full that it's just going to go back into the shade somewhere and take a nap, and it will naturally fast because it doesn't need to be eating. It doesn't need 3 meals and 3 snacks. It doesn't need to hunt 6 times for, 6 times a day for yogurt and granola bars in between meals. So we see that pattern in other animals. It just makes a lot of sense that we could do the same thing and really thrive with that.
That's right. We can mimic it. Now, just to be clear, I want people to understand this. So we don't come in metabolically healthy. What this process will get us metabolically healthy. In other words, don't come in and expect to just go right into feasting and fasting, because it's not going to work. You have to prime your body to get to that point, get it used to getting there. The tiger or whatever, this is what they do, right? They're metabolically healthy, but we come so broken that we actually have to fix ourselves to get our metabolism working again properly before we can actually do it properly later on.
That's a really good point. We're dealing with 2 different metabolically healthy examples when we talk about that.
Right.
Now, there's a little bit of controversy to this, although I don't really think there is. Is this something that can be done safely long-term?
What is that? The feasting and fasting?
Yes, feasting and fasting.
So yes, so I am a big proponent of alternate day fasts. Okay, so I was doing it. Let's see, I've been doing it for 4 years, but only 6 months out of the year because at first I was scared because nobody's really done it for that long. But I was doing it literally for 6 months out of the year, and 6 months I would just do carnivore only. And I saw the shifts enough with the first 3 years to notice that I actually get worse when I stay on carnivore only compared to the alternate day fast. So this year, I'm going to go through the whole year alternate day fasted. There'll be breaks here and there. Like, for example, at KetoCon, I took like a 10-day break and just ate liberally, carnivore, of course. And then now I'm right back on the alternate day fasting. But there's so much benefit on that alternate day fasting that I was like, I don't see why I would not do this as a lifestyle. So this is what I actually try to teach people, that my program only teaches you the tip of the iceberg. And then there's the alternate day fast part to get to. It's a true mind shift, because can you imagine socially how that does? It's not hard to do, but the social aspect is really the hard problem. Oh, I'm not going to eat tomorrow. Yeah, sorry, Mom. I know it's your birthday. You know what I mean? So there's a lot of issues there, and of course, for yourself, it's a cognitive shift because you've never done something like this before. But that's where I really truly shone in my healing.
Yeah, gotcha. Do you get concerned when people take their fasting too far? Like when, I know you mentioned already 72-hour fast, when is a fast taken too far, and when do you start to have concerns about fasting too long?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So that's the thing. A lot of people think, and I've been caught up into this too. Hey, a little bit of fasting is great. A lot more is a lot better, right? And that's obviously not the case. So there had to be modalities that I did put in that actually said, hey, let's find out if you're in getting to the malnourished state, right? How do we find out? There are actually key signs that you can look at and go by to find out that you're sliding into more of malnourishment. So I like to watch for that, but there is a little bit of issues. So anything above 72 hours, for example, 72 hours are very doable. If you're doing it like once a week, you can get away. I mean, not once a week, once a month. You can get away with doing it twice a month with the alternate day fasting. Alternate day fasting is very doable. But when you start getting into the 5-day, 10-day range, all of those become a totally different story. What happens is your body literally starts shutting down certain things. So really, in honesty, it goes into a stasis mode. So those are different types of talk, right? And of course, with longer fasts like that, 14 days or so, there will be refeeding problems. But I don't teach any of that. And there are separate benefits for those, like apoptosis and, whether you're deep in cancer or whatnot. So, but that's a whole different modality. And unfortunately, I really think if you're going to go into the longer day fast, you may want somebody to watch over you. But with the short day fast up to 72 hours, totally safe in my book.
As we move into 2024, our next episode is titled Change Your Diet, Change Your Mind with Dr. Georgia Ede. This was episode 584 of Boundless Body Radio, which was released on January 31st, 2024. I said this in the introduction of this episode, and I seriously meant it. Dr. Ede's publicity people reached out to us to see if we would host her on the show, and I could not have responded to that email faster. I was so excited. I'd been reaching out for years to host Dr. Ede. I followed her work for a very, very long time. She is absolutely wonderful. I was so fortunate to meet her in person at the Symposium for Metabolic Health in San Diego 2024. She's an absolute angel. She wrote an incredible book, Change Your Diet, Change Your Mind. I hope as the listener or somebody watching, you're very familiar with her work because it's absolutely wonderful. If you haven't gotten the book, make sure you go out and get it. The field of metabolic psychiatry would not be what it is today without Dr. Ede and her amazing work. So this was one of my all-time favorite episodes. Again, titled Change Your Diet, Change Your Mind with Dr. Georgia Ede, episode 584 of Boundless Body Radio, released on January 31st, 2024. I am going to steal this question from Ali Houston. He asked you when you were on his podcast. I love the question. What would be a win before you knew nutrition could help somebody when you were just using the tools that you were trained in? And what would be an example of a win after using nutrition as well? Again, I think you've kind of already alluded to it, but I love the question. I love the answer.
Allie's great. And it is a great question. So, before when I practiced conventionally, a win would be, say, for example, I had somebody with a serious mental illness, especially somebody with a psychotic illness. I can think of hundreds of people. This story would apply to hundreds of people over the years. Say I had somebody with a serious mental illness, like bipolar disorder or a psychosis. Those particular disorders, depending on where the person was at in their illness, if they were in a manic state, let's say they have bipolar disorder, bipolar illness, and they're in a manic phase, the manic phase is often accompanied by very poor insight into the illness. And so it's usually during a manic phase when people will stop medication or they will not agree that there is an issue to be dealt with or that there is anything wrong. And the same is often, of course, true of people with psychosis, is that there can be very poor insight into not only the events that are going on around them and with the people around them, a different view of reality, but also poor insight into the fact that there is something wrong that needs treatment. And so, again, that person may be difficult to convince, say, to try a medication or to stay on a medication. So a win back then would always feel like a win when I was somehow able to convince somebody who really needed help that they needed help and that in a way that they would accept. That was a real challenge. And it still is, of course, in psychiatry. I still work with patients with poor insight, and I still work with patients who don't think anything is wrong and who don't want to change their diet. But back then, it really was, those were the most challenging cases. And because those cases were very, very high risk, these were people who often were suicidal or were not in control of their behaviors and could make some very risky decisions and put themselves at risk or their families at risk or others at risk. So that would always feel like a win. Now, what feels like a win, and I'll give an example. I've been working with a gentleman for I think almost 4 years now, who has had a really, really hard time staying on a low carbohydrate diet and maintaining weight loss and keeping blood sugars in control. And somebody with type 2 diabetes and who's already lost 100 pounds and for the most part kept it off with a lot of kind of ups and downs, slipping off the diet, going back on the diet. And this is pretty common with low carb diets, and just a lot of difficulty, largely because of some food addiction issues, which are very, very common. So anyway, working together and trying to get him back on track whenever when he would stray from the diet or the diet would get interrupted. So some fits and starts and 3 steps forward, 2 steps back kind of thing, right? So this was going on for a couple of years, the past couple of years. He did really well in the beginning, and then it just kind of started to fray at the edges. A win now is him finally agreeing to try a carnivore diet, which I had been recommending whenever he would come and say, "This is really hard. I'm hungry all the time. I want a snack. I'm my weight is going up and down. I'm thinking about food all the time, especially when I'm stressed or I'm not feeling physically well. I reach for a food that was not on my diet." So I've recommended a carnivore a number of times as a reset. And finally, he said, "Well, I've tried everything else. This clearly isn't working. Let me give it a try." So, within 2 weeks, he's feeling so much better. The blood sugars are coming down beautifully. They're so stable. I follow them he uses a glucose monitor. I follow the glucose readings. And it's just a beautiful experience to watch that glucose, which is high and going up and down and going up, 150, 180, 200, 300, and it comes right down, into 110, 120, 190. He never had blood sugars in that range on a low carbohydrate diet. And he said to me, and it struck me, it really stuck with me what he said, because I know him really well. I've been working with him for a long time. And he's the same age as I am, right? And so he said, for the first time in 60 years, I feel full when I eat. And that's a brand new experience for me. And I just, for somebody like that who has been just white knuckling it on a low carbohydrate diet, he doesn't need that willpower. He doesn't need that willpower anymore, because the diet regulates his appetite and his blood sugars and his mood and his concentration and his energy levels. He's got less pain. His breathing is better. His outlook is better. He gets more work done. And he is very surprised at how easy it is. Somebody with that history, so many of us, and I include myself in this group, you have no idea how much easier it can be if you eat what gives your body the right signals. You shouldn't have to be fighting like that every single day to try to eat properly.
That's amazing. 60 years of being hungry. That's crazy. And I love what Nicole Laurent told us last time we had her on. What you're doing is already hard. If you're seeing a psychiatrist, that's already really challenging. Changing your diet is not as hard as what you're going through now. It will become easier. It becomes more simple. You'll like it. And to have that feeling of just being satiated for the first time, what a gift. It's so absolutely amazing. You just hear those stories over and over and over in this community where people go to low carb, it helps, they go keto, and that really helps them lose weight a little bit more. But you take that next step if you want to try and carnivore, and that's when so many different things clear up. And so let's talk about that in the context of your book, which is, I'm so looking forward to this. I can't wait. It seems like every year we've got 1 or 2 books that are coming out that everybody in the community is so excited about, whether it's brain energy or, toxic superfoods last year. So excited for your book. Knowing how you kind of separated into the 2 different parts, you've got 4 different sections, and how you structured everything. Part of it is talking about what specifically is the diet. You've already mentioned low carb, you've mentioned carnivore diets. What is it specifically about animal-based foods that are really, really good for you? And then I'll save the second question about plant foods and how they could potentially be bad for you.
Well, that's great. I offer a number of strategies in the book, sort of a low glycemic paleo diet for people to explore, a ketogenic, whole foods ketogenic diet, and then a carnivore option. So people can, kind of grab on where they feel most comfortable. But the reason why why I say in the book, make animal foods, if you can possibly manage to do this, because I know it's not everybody's cup of tea, if you can manage to make the animal foods the core of your diet and then build out from there, because I think that's really essential. That needs to be the heart of the diet. If you're looking for optimal health, you can get by with other strategies, perhaps, depending on the situation and how you supplement and that sort of thing. But if you're looking for optimal physical and mental health, optimal nutrition, optimal function for your cells, all of your cells, you want the core of the diet to be animal foods. And then, the reason why is because only animal foods provide every nutrient we need in its proper form and without anti-nutrients. And I should say there are a couple of anti-nutrients in dairy and eggs. There's a whole chapter on dairy and eggs that explains why they're different.
I was going to ask you about
But
that.
but in terms of animal foods, meat, seafood, poultry, there you won't find anti-nutrients in those foods. And so these are really optimally nourishing. And so they have everything you need and nothing you don't want. That's always a surprise to people who aren't familiar with these concepts, because it's exactly the opposite of what we're told. And so, if you need to, really what I've designed the book around is this concept of nourish, protect, energize, right? So what is a brain healthy diet? A brain healthy diet needs to do three things. It needs to nourish the brain, it needs to protect the brain, and it needs to energize the brain, right? So you need all your nutrients. You cannot get all of your nutrients unless you include animal foods in your diet. You can try to supplement your way around it. We're not sure if that's even as good. But if you're eating a whole foods diet, unsupplemented diet, really animal foods are your best friend. So, and the protect is don't eat things that are damaging to the brain. Refined carbohydrates, vegetable oils, cassava root, which is a increasingly popular ingredient in snack foods because it's gluten-free and it's probably pretty inexpensive as well. Because it actually contains cyanide, which is a mitochondrial poison. So I think it's really important for people to know that not all plants are on your side. So I think so protect the brain from damaging ingredients and energize the brain. And all that means is keeping your blood sugar and insulin levels in healthy range. And there is no food that is better supportive of that goal than animal foods, because, and I'll say non-dairy animal foods, because animal foods are very low in carbohydrate, so they can't raise your blood sugar. Only plant foods can raise your blood sugar. So that's where I think those three principles apply best to animal foods. Beyond that, if anything else you eat other than animal foods is based on your personal tolerances, preferences, health goals, and what so you can add plant foods to that core to the extent that you tolerate them, and that you enjoy them. Yeah. But are they necessary? I'm not convinced that they are, but I certainly support. I support people who want to obviously have a mixed diet. I think most people do want a mixed diet. And so I explain in the book kind of, which plant foods are the kinder, gentler ones. Yeah. If you're going to have plant foods in your diet, there are some that are really pretty easy to work with, and others which I think are really important to stay away from.
Last but not least for this episode for today, we are going to episode 816 called Superfoods Are Toxic with oxalate expert Sally K. Norton. She's absolutely amazing as well. We released this episode on May 12th, 2025. Sally is another amazing person out there. Like I said, we've hosted her several times on our show. I got to meet her for the very first time at KetoCon 2023, where she just absolute savage move went up in the stage at KetoCon and talked about some of the harms, even of some of the vendors that were at the show that were selling different things that had oxalate in them. She gave a wonderful talk. She's been absolutely wonderful to get to know over the years, and really enjoyed this episode, which was by far one of our most popular this year, 2025. Again, the title is Superfoods Are Toxic with oxalate expert Sally K. Norton. This was episode 816 of Boundless Body Radio and was released on May 12th, 2025. Remind us also what the family of oxalates, we call them oxalates. It's a few different things. Remind us what those are and where the source of that comes from.
Right. So oxalic acid is this parent compound that's a tiny molecule with two carbons and four oxygens. So heavy oxygen molecule, quite tiny, made by nature. It's a kind of a degenerative product because it can be formed from other things. And so even in a polluted air, acid rain contains oxalic acid. Soils are loaded with oxalic acid and the crystals that are made from it. So crystalline oxalate forms from oxalic acid forming bonds with minerals, especially calcium. So calcium oxalate is considered what we call an insoluble, hard to dissolve molecule that forms crystals, as do all the kind of crystalline salts of oxalate. So oxalate can form crystals with magnesium and heavy metals and all kinds, but calcium is its favorite partner. So calcium oxalate and the crystals that form from it are throughout nature in the soils. Plants make oxalic acid, often from vitamin C first. You make vitamin C, which easily degenerates into oxalic acid, and then they'll build crystals. And when you eat certain plants that do this well or need to for their physiology, you're eating both oxalic acid and calcium oxalate crystals. The crystals are quite mechanically damaging to your mucosal tissues in your mouth and intestinal tract, because that's just a single cell of a single wall of, not a wall, but a single lining of cells. Like it's not multi-layers of cells susceptible to damage despite mucus production, all that. The crystals are hard like quartz, very irritating and sharp, but the oxalic acid gets into the body just like magnesium or potassium or something that just is water soluble that floats into the bloodstream, right between the cells of the intestinal tract. So you're eating oxalic acid that gets in your blood. You're eating crystals that irritate your intestinal tract and what we, the alimentary canal, all the way from your teeth down. Literally, those crystals in the plants can cause dental wear. They call it micro wear, and wear down your teeth. That's how hard they are. They're harder than your teeth.
Wow. Wow. I think that's underplayed how that affects the teeth. And I told you this before, to try to sell somebody on oxalate and what it is, the mechanical side of things is like the least damaging. Like you said, it causes lots of damage. It's mechanical in nature. You typically get rid of it through the digestive tract. To think that that's the least amount of damage, yet it's like eating glass or sandpaper. I'll have somebody mentally take a piece of raw spinach and chew it up and describe the mouthfeel and explain like, yeah, what you're feeling, the grittiness that you're feeling on your mouth, in your teeth is oxalate crystals. And that can help like really have somebody like understand what this is like. Cause I think most people can relate to that.
Yeah. And so the thing is, I wish we could have that feedback. If we had feedback that direct and the openness to it, we would be able to kind of relate to this. But one of the foods that puts in these crystals is kiwi. Kiwi is a lot of these two-sided, toothpick-shaped little shards. Like the plants make these bundles, like think of it as a quiver full of arrows. They're double-pointed arrows, and they like hundreds of them, a couple hundred of them in one little vessel, and then lots of little vessels. And those are concentrated around the seeds of the kiwi. So there's like this blob of kind of pectin that encase seeded areas, and especially in a kiwi.
Yeah.
So that pectin blob kind of is a soft cushion around those vacuoles and that can kind of dull your ability to tell they're there until those break out of that pectin bubble. So it's going to be maybe lower down in your digestive tract where they start being abrasive.
Wow. Okay. Well, that's a perfect segue because I was going to ask you about the acute symptoms of consuming and getting rid of oxalate and also the chronic symptoms. So can you talk about are there ways that we can tell in the short term that oxalate is becoming problematic again, either in the consumption or the output of oxalate? And also what are some of the chronic things that can build up over time?
Well, this is the maddening thing. And there's so many things that are sort of ironic and frustrating with oxalate and poisoning because it's very hard to tell when it's your healthy diet making you sick. So somebody might go into like CrossFit and start doing chocolate and almonds and spinach and so on, and trying really hard with these healthy foods, and they cannot figure out why they keep getting worse. And is that because the symptoms are delayed and vague and you just feel loopy and you don't sleep so well and you're getting up to pee and your skin starts itching a little bit and you start getting grumpier and you start getting frustrated and you're trying hard and you're getting more spinach and you can't put it together, So The thing to look for, though, is bedtime symptoms. Pretty common, where you're starting to have things like hiccuping, belching, discouragement, itching, things that come on sort of a circadian way. And bedtime is common because if you're eating, well, some of the foods, and we haven't reviewed them, but you don't have to eat superfoods to get sick with oxalate. You could be a potato person. So if you have like hash browns at McDonald's, and then you have like pizza with spinach on it, or more French fries or potato chips, like all the box lunches, throw in a bag of potato chips, right? Or on the airline, like there's going to be potato chips, or even taro chips with root chips, or even worse. And, so you could do, let's say, peanut butter sandwich, potato chips, and chocolate, and you can be eating a high oxalate diet, right? So that could be like just regular folk doing that. It doesn't have to be the health nuts and nutrition geeks, but either way, that food is got a lag time of absorption, where the absorption meaning the oxalic acid gets into your bloodstream and starts messing around with your tissues. So that lag, you get a peak about 4 hours after the meal. So at lunchtime, you get a peak from breakfast. At dinner, you get a peak from lunch. And at bedtime, you get a peak from all 3 meals, because it's still going on 8 or 10 hours later. So you've only had like 12 hours of eating foods, and here you are, 3 meals adding up at bedtime. So I think looking for problems in the evening or overnight, having to wake up, having to pee a lot, getting times when your bladder's a little crotchety, and causing you to run to the bathroom too many times, or you're heavy peeing, or trouble with peeing, prostatitis, infections, things like sinus infections, yeast infections, or apparent UTIs. These kinds of things can be oxalate related. Tooth sensitivity, problems with either your vision or your hearing, headaches, migraines, mood problems, big time, because this is neurotoxic. So the neurotoxicity can lead to those sensory problems and those mood problems and pain syndromes. It's also destructive to connective tissues. So if you have arthritis and rheumatoid things, or itises like tennis elbow, golfer's shoulder, golfer's this or that, like that kind of connective tissue stuff, prolapse something or other, that was what was going on with my feet, is that the connective tissue was too soft and not having enough integrity. And so that was probably causing imperceptible spreading, which was causing the pain and the ache in the feet. Once that connective tissue firmed up, because the oxalates weren't there destroying it, I was fine.
Wow. Wow. Well, this is something that I overlook and miss all the time. Like the meal that you described as a high oxalate meal, a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, some potato chips, and chocolate. Like that's like my standard high school. Like that would have been easily one of my lunches every single day that I would have eaten. I probably would have had 2 of the sandwiches and, all that kind of thing. So
it sounds like a teenager diet.
Totally.
Right?
Yeah, totally. No wonder I fell asleep in class and didn't get the best grades.
Yeah, that
weird.
was happening to me too. I was trying to study. I was a good student with A's, and I was trying to do my studies at home, and I'd fall asleep in my bedroom right on the desk.
Yeah, it's crazy. Dude, you needed like granola bars just to get from first period to second period or whatever. Yeah, terrible. And so I always think of oxalate problems as happening to people like our mutual friend James Lehman, who was vegetarian vegan for a very long time. And they are the ones putting handfuls of spinach and almonds and almond butter and almond milk in a blender, blending it up and drinking that maybe multiple times a day. People that are ironically, again, trying to do the quote unquote healthy thing. They're going way out of their way to quote unquote eat healthy and eat all these things. But I forget all the time that even in a normal standard American diet, somebody can really mess themselves up quite easily. Like, what is the threshold that you see? Is it one meal like that every day can put somebody in like oxalate overload? Or like, how easy is it for somebody who is completely unaware of nutrition and doesn't care at all about it, that this can be a problem for them?
Isn't it interesting that we need to know these answers and nobody's studying it? It's like, we need to know, and because there's a huge barn door variability. All people are susceptible to toxins. This is like mercury, aluminum, or any other thing you don't want, glyphosate. You can only handle so much. Now, without really falling apart, you might handle more than the next person, but that doesn't mean you're necessarily getting away with it, because it's asymptomatic. A lot of times this is going on under the hood, and your body's just a real trooper carrying on and letting you believe you're healthier than you are. Because, with most diseases, it isn't that symptomatic. You can't tell you have hypertension until you get a blood pressure cuff. You know, you need an MRI to find a tumor. You can't tell it's there. And often things don't pop through until you're in stage 4 or something. You're like near the end of the disease process. So a whole bunch of disease process goes on without symptoms. So that's a big problem when you can't even acknowledge that there's a connection to foods and these disease processes. So how do you know, or like, how much is okay? How much is not okay? Well, based on science, a fairly small amount is tolerated every day, maybe 150 milligrams, 200 milligrams of oxalate, which from a standpoint of a spinach salad is about a quarter of a spinach salad, maybe a third of a spinach, depending on how big your salad is. Like, it isn't very much. And on a meal basis, it's really maybe 6 spinach leaves is about your capacity.
Wow.
Right. So if you start messing around with things like potato chips every day, I mean, somebody came to me, he was in his early 30s, extremely sick with fatigue and all kinds of health problems. He was on a Pringles diet as a kind of adolescent rebellion against his parents or whoever. And he literally was eating mostly Pringles. And that is so also draining of minerals and nutrients. It has none of the nutrients you need. And it has the toxin of oxalate and many other toxins in potatoes, which get sealed in with the heat. Oxalate isn't destroyed by the heat. You deep fry a potato into a potato chip or a French fry, and you've got sealed in soluble oxalate just ready to rock and roll. The heat of the cooking doesn't affect oxalates at all. Now, some foods, if you boil it, you can leach off some if you throw out the water with broccoli, but that's not true for asparagus. So like, it's true, it's not consistently true. And people think, well, fermentation will help you. And there's always room for dismissing, like, well, the excuses left and right. No, we haven't really taken this topic seriously. And that's too bad, because we don't really know what your tolerance is and what's going on under the hood. And in public health, we need to assume we're all vulnerable to a disease. That's why we put warnings on cigarettes, right? Because we're going to assume that there's a vulnerability that we can't know until after the fact. Even though only like 2% of people who smoke get lung cancer, it's all over the packaging that this is going to give you lung cancer. But only 2% get it. So really, regardless of what your risk is, if you're eating these foods consistently, that's like smoking. You're taking a risk, and you don't know where it's going to lead you into misery. But once it leads you to misery, it is misery that's not quick to reverse. And a lot of those symptoms that you have getting sick, that you're not connecting to the source of the problem, are harder when you're trying to reverse the problem later.
And that concludes this episode of all of your favorite episodes of Boundless Body Radio over the years. I hope you really enjoyed that, and maybe hopefully it inspired you to go back and listen to some of these full interviews, which were amazing. We always save everything in our archives. You can always go back on wherever you get your podcasts and find some of this old content. You can also message me if you like. You can go to our website, which is myboundlessbody.com. And if you need tips on how to find different episodes or a topic that you're interested in, I can send you a list of all the different episodes that we've done that may be related to what you're looking to find. As we've done so many different episodes, it can kind of get a little bit overwhelming if you're digging around trying to find something of a particular topic. So thank you very much for listening. Thank you for supporting us here at Boundless Body Radio. We're so excited about this 5th anniversary. We have one more special episode to come that will release in a few days at the time of this recording. But as of now, thank you so very much for listening to Boundless Body Radio.